Hey, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, you're coming in the middle of a conversation that we're having about Matthew chapter 10 and the fact that Jesus says sheep all the time. So if this is your first time here, a very warm welcome. Thank you for hanging out with me. You might enjoy jumping back one episode because though most of our conversations are one-off and then we're on to the next idea, this one really is a two-parter and it's going to make way more sense if you go and catch the first part. All right, buzzwords for recent presidencies in the United States. Trump, it's great, right? America, great. Obama, it's change. Bush, all I could come up with is strategery. There's got to be something better. I don't know why I'm still sticking with that. And then if I keep going back any further, it gets beyond what we think about or remember. So we'll just do those three. You got a buzzword that maybe they meant to pick. Maybe it got assigned to them. It doesn't matter. These big, significant players, there's like one, two, maybe three theme concepts or words that we come to associate with them. And I was saying last time around that if you actually stop and think about it with Jesus, sheep is one of the words that he uses a lot and deserves consideration for being one of the words associated with him. So right now, what we're talking about is the Old Testament use of the idea of sheep or Israel as the lost sheep, and the idea that there were bad shepherds that God himself blames for what went wrong in Israel. And then, of course, in the New Testament, we get the theme of the Good Shepherd with Jesus. And so we're talking about the sheep thing from that angle. But if we go even further in making my case for why sheep might be the buzzword that you would put on a red and blue stylized poster of Jesus looking wistfully to the future, is because this use of sheep is all over the place, but we didn't talk about this last time. You also have the whole Lamb of God thing. I mean, lamb's a sheep, right? See, so I don't know. It seems like there's a lot there. Let's keep breaking down what we were breaking down. We looked at Isaiah 53 last time around, which gives us all that language about the suffering Messiah, and then the sheep thing comes up in 53:6 of Isaiah. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Again, put a mental pin in that because we're going to come back to it in just a minute. And then we jump over to Jeremiah. We get more of that language about sheep being led astray by bad shepherds. And now we pick up this lost sheep theme again in the next major prophet, who is Ezekiel, starting in verse 34. And I'm going to read to you for a minute here. So what I'd like you to do is get comfortable. If you're in the car, I want you to close one eye all the way and the other one only like 3/4 of the way. And just kind of drape your hand on the wheel. Everything will be fine. Relax, breathe into this. If you happen to be in the gym at about mile 4 wearing your super sweat-stained unitard, I want you to just turn that thing down to real slow, close your eyes, maybe turn the thing all the way off and just rock back and forth quietly while I read to you right there. This is going to be great. Actually, it is going to be great because Ezekiel 34 is pretty juicy, but I'm going to read for a minute. Here we go. The word of the Lord came to me. So again, Ezekiel is crediting what is about to be said, not to a thing he thought of. The text holds itself out as coming directly from God in this case, not indirectly inspired by God in conjunction with a human author. This is like God is saying this stuff. Son of man, we'll come back to that term later. Prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. There's a sheep thing again. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourself with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you don't take care of the flock. You've not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You haven't brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You've ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. And if you were in the last conversation, you know that sounds a whole lot like what's being said over in Jeremiah. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds didn't search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I'll remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them, as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he's with them, so I'll look after my sheep. I'll rescue them from all the places they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I'll bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I'll bring them into their own land. I'll pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines, and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them in a good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they'll lie down in good grazing land, and they'll feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. Now, a lot of that language in the second half reminds you a lot of the most memorized passage, maybe in the whole Bible, but certainly in the Old Testament, that being the 23rd Psalm, which is a pastoral or a shepherding psalm. And who wrote that one? Well, it's David. What did David do before he got into the king business? Oh, well, he was a shepherd. And who is Jesus? He's the descendant of David. He's the king who sits on the throne of David. Do you see how the whole thing always hangs together? This is such a crazy, trippy document, the way it works like that. So what Ezekiel is talking about here is the obliteration of the family of faith that God had made. Then God hands off the family of faith to the shepherds, and the shepherds completely blow it. And the result that we've just got done reading, if we're going all the way through the Old Testament, is that they blow it so badly and selfishly and recklessly and incestuously and violently that they sell themselves out all under the guise of the banner of leadership and patriotism, and they get wiped out because of their stupidity and their pride by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, respectively. And that's the imagery we're getting here about the wild animals coming in and devouring the flock. And God places the blame on the bad shepherd for that. Fast forward over to the New Testament. In John, you get very overt I am statements. And these I am statements are drawing on the name of God in the Old Testament, I am. And John has Jesus making 7 statements saying I am, which to anybody in the original audience would obviously be read as saying I am God. The same way if I declared I am president to a modern audience, everybody would know that I mean I am president, whether that's delusional or not. In Matthew, it's a little more subtle. All right, take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. You remember that one from the previous chapter, chapter 9? And people are like, whoa, you can't do that. Only God can forgive sins. Well, guess what? They actually read between the lines correctly there, the enemies of Jesus. He was effectively saying, yeah, I'm God, I can do that. And back when we were looking at the end of chapter 9, I really directed our attention toward the character of Jesus, seeing this mess, being overcome with compassion instead of judgment and hostility. And that's totally there, and I'm glad we took our time on that. But now we've got to a place where we just looked at all that stuff in the Old Testament, and this reads a little bit differently. Think about what Jesus is claiming when he makes this observation. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew is saying that Jesus sees Israel the way God sees Israel. It's a very subtle claim to Jesus' divinity and to the suggestion that he is indeed the Messiah. A little ways down the road in a passage I keep alluding to and cannot wait to get to soon, in chapter 15, Jesus is on a little road trip up north, and the Canaanite lady comes up to him and is like, I got problems. I really need your help. Have mercy on me, son of David. And Jesus is like, I'm trying to do a thing right now. And the disciples are like, let's send her away. But he answered, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And the woman came and knelt before him and said, Lord, help me. And then Jesus replied to some stuff that I don't have time to break down, but ultimately he does help her. But he's still sticking to his guns as he laid things out in Matthew chapter 10, which is theoretically the passage we're actually looking at right now. I know we've been jumping around a lot. When he starts his missional discourse, telling the disciples to go out in chapter 10, saying, don't go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. But you've heard this one. You jump ahead a little further, and Jesus is talking sheep again in Matthew 18, starting verse 12. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he's happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that didn't wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. And ultimately, even Jesus' disciples take this sheep metaphor cue from the Old Testament and from Jesus, because Peter, in 1 Peter 2, he writes, for you were like sheep going astray, but now you've returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls, which is like directly from Isaiah chapter 53. This is so much stuff. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to overwhelm you at all, but this is huge and important for understanding Matthew's thesis, and we're trying to understand what Matthew is doing. He's arguing Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus is the one who comes and straightens stuff out for the lost sheep of Israel, just like was predicted that the Messiah was supposed to do in the Old Testament. And his compassion for those sheep isn't an interesting quirk or bonus that makes Jesus more likable and relatable. It's a necessary component of who the Messiah just has to be. So when the original live audience that Jesus is talking to, or Matthew's original reading audience, encountered this material, they wouldn't have been like, oh, he likes to talk about sheep. Oh, that's interesting. Sheep are cool, I guess, or whatever. This would have popped off the page. This would have popped out of the air and into their ears, and they would have been like, whoa, that's a lot of sheep language. I know what the sheep language means. It's not the most flattering in terms of how it reflects on us, but also the God who's behind it is always compassionate about us rascals who sometimes get things wrong. And likewise, as you and I read this stuff, there's a reassurance in how God feels about the lost sheep of Israel, because it seems like that extends beyond the boundaries of Israel ultimately, as Jesus does his thing, goes to the cross, dies on the cross, and sends out his disciples to the larger world to take this thing global, because everybody's a lost sheep. We all get some stuff right. We all get some stuff wrong. But what we're getting here is a Bible-long characterization of a God who's perfect and an immeasurable, infinite amount better than us. And he still gives a rip. He's still going to redeem it. He's still going to do something to make things better. And in the face of an ever angrier, ever weirder, ever more broken-looking world, it is so refreshing to my ears, and I hope yours, even if we don't come at all of this the exact same way, to hear a message of hope that suggests that somebody's in charge of all of this stuff, and that ultimately there is this impulse of love and redemption that is going on even as sometimes all our eyes see as the human impulse toward the difficult stuff. Matt, this is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.